Chicago architecture was transformed because of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, which allowed for the renewal of the city's architecture as a new center for modern buildings, most specifically the growth of commercial architecture. Compared to older styles of architecture, commercial architecture introduced the groundbreaking concept of working more on a vertical scale, thus introducing skyscrapers. By working on a vertical scale, the heavily populated Chicago could help maximize profits for landlords that owned the highly demanded land, as well as conserve space in the city. The Chicago Fire and the new population increase allowed for the leadership of brilliant modern architects, specifically William LeBaron Jenney, who is credited with the first skyscraper and whose steel frame design led to endless potential for height of commercial-style buildings. His legacy of the first skyscraper and innovative structural designs allowed for new architects, including many that Jenney had educated, to create architecture that led to the reshaping of Chicago, eventually influencing the rest of the country and world to follow the example of the vertical city. The city, however, didn't always have such a commercial and vertical landscape. Before the Great Chicago Fire, many buildings in Chicago were made from wood, and in combination with a huge population increase due to immigrants in search of jobs, it was no wonder that a catastrophe would be virtually inevitable. The Great Chicago Fire burned down over 3 square miles of the city and left a third of the city homeless, burning on for over 24 hours until it was put out by rain during an unusually dry summer. Since most of the buildings were made of wood, the fire was able to spread quickly and far. The fire, despite its grave repercussions, was monumental because it allowed for a great revival of the architectural aspect of the city. With all the dated wooden structures destroyed, the city had to act quickly to repair their downtown center, and new architects flocked to the city, ready to take advantage of the new land. Due to the new anti-wood building codes, architects focused on fireproofing buildings and making sure the buildings could accommodate the vastly growing population. Wooden structures were at first replaced with heavy masonry such as bricks and mortar. The walls supported the structure of the building and had to be thicker as the building got taller. This caused a serious issue of available space in the rapidly expanding city, as well as a lack of light through the thick walls in time before electric lights were invented. We asked Chicago architect Dan Miller about the transition from masonry to steel frame designs in construction.
The walls at the base are about 6 feet thick in order to carry the structural load. Going taller was just getting to take up so much space at the base of the building. The steel frame is thin and quick to put up. Problem solved. At the same time, Chicago had just burned to the ground, so buildings had to be much more resistant to fire.
As a huge influx of immigrants moved into Chicago searching for jobs and a place to live, the need for a new way of building immensely heightened. And so, a brave team of architects led by William LeBaron Jenney set out to repair the city's ruins from the fire, creating a style known as the First Chicago School. Jenney, an engineer trained in France and America, was the one to come up with a solution. He designed a metal frame building, the first of its kind, where the frame, rather than the walls, would hold up the floors. Jenney's first post-Civil War commission was the first Leader building, in which he experimented with a glass wall facade, which allowed much natural light to reach the inside offices. He was able to place many windows on the building because the steel frame was very stable. However, the structure was still heavily supported by masonry. Then, using his metal frame design, Jenney constructed the first ever skyscraper, the Home Insurance Building, constructed in 1885 with a total of 10 floors. The steel frame allowed for him to exceed the standard 3-story buildings of the time despite its weight. Although costly, Jenney's building became an architectural model for the city. With this new development, height was essentially unlimited, and skyscrapers rapidly emerged following Jenney's design. Jenney's next commissions in the late 1880s were the Manhattan and Second Leader buildings. The Manhattan building, the tallest of its time at 16 stories, seemed a risky structure because of its narrow base and great height. However, Jenney solved this issue using diagonal cross bracing rather than just a horizontal and vertical frame. During the Columbian Exposition of 1893, visitors flocked to see this architectural phenomenon, which included gargoyle-like faces carved into the stones that faced downwards, so that when people looked up, the building would, in a way, look back at them. However, this artistic flair was not particularly common in rising commercial architecture. For instance, the second-later building in comparison was a straight-line structure that was meant to be built quickly and simply, and was unadorned except for the horizontal rows of windows. This became a more popular method in the city as the need for commercial buildings rose, and many commissioners wanted their new buildings to be completed as quickly as possible, expanding and heightening Chicago's growing skyline. This expansion into the skyline not only made Chicago unique, but also allowed the downtown area, where the demand to live was high and therefore so was the price of living, to accommodate more residents, thus helping landlords earn more money by taking advantage of the more efficient use of land by building vertically. This would eventually lead to Chicago's further rise in population and make them the second most populous city in America, increasing the importance of efficient land use, meaning skyscrapers soon became an important revenue generator for the city, as well as providing necessary jobs for the rising population of immigrants to build and maintain these structures. It was due in part to the Bessemer steel process and the emergence of monopolies that the first Chicago school could create such tall buildings as steel prices went down drastically, and using this high-endurance metal in such vast amounts became not only possible, but very cost-efficient. Thanks to Jenny, skyscrapers soon began to emerge throughout the nation and the world. Further developments in buildings designed by Jenny's co-workers and protégés were created completely by steel frames, without back walls or supportive poles made of masonry, such as the addition to the Monadnock building, which incorporated the steel frame design, and the Fisher building, which used the fireproof terracotta exterior. These buildings, both National Historic Landmarks for their innovative usage of Jenny's inventions, along with others of similar style, can still be found on South Dearborn, just north of Congress. They are exceptional examples of the beginnings of commercial architecture, not just because of the utilization of the steel frame, but also because of the Gothic artistry that can be seen on their exteriors. Without the invention of this frame, Chicago also would not be the industrious and commercial city it is today, nor would any other city have been able to reach the heights they did. Not only did the invention of the skyscraper allow thousands of more people to live in the city, it also created countless job opportunities and housing for these new workers. After 1884 and the invention of the skyscraper, the population grew more than 118% after 6 years and kept on growing. After the Chicago fire, thousands were left homeless without jobs, and Chicago was on the way to an economic depression. The rise of skyscrapers turned Chicago around and established it as a commercial success, and Chicago became one of the most dominant cities in the United States. The development of skyscrapers and dramatically increasing population led Chicago to become the biggest meatpacking city in the world and one of the biggest suppliers of steel and iron in the United States, and its location allowed for it to become a center of railroad transportation for the country. Though Jenny's home insurance building was only 10 stories tall, his design has inspired innovations that have allowed for buildings like Dubai's Burj Khalifa, 163 stories, to be built, as well as Chicago's own Sears Tower, which holds 108 stories. Jenny's invention did not come and go. Rather, it was the beginning of a long road of development that has allowed for skyscrapers to cover the world with continuing innovations of commercial architecture. Since he created the basic skyscraper, architects were able to advance styles, thus creating stronger structures along with more advanced artistic elements. Many notable architects who emerged from Chicago, such as Burnham, Root, Dankmar, Sullivan, and Roche, all built off of and developed Jenny's original steel frame. Chicago's skyline may have been surpassed in height since Jenny's first commission, but it will forever be known as the birthplace of the skyscraper. Over time, as architectural developments have been made to Chicago, it has been transformed into a phenomenon, and to this day is one of the biggest hotspots for architecture in the world. Along with sky-high buildings like the Trump Tower, Sears Tower, and John Hancock, the Chicago Board of Trade and water towers are monumental buildings, attracting many tourists. Each building in the city is different, and all add to Chicago's awe-inspiring skyline, making Chicago one of the most magnificent cities in the world. If the Chicago fire had never happened and Jenny hadn't needed to create the steel frame, Chicago would be a considerably smaller and flatter city today. His invention has transformed not only Chicago's architecture, but that of the world in ways unimaginable, and Chicago is now a truly one-of-a-kind city.